The Blue Devils, Book 1, Chaos Barren, Chapter 3, Deus Absconditus. In his sleep, Scarves heard a voice. It said, "This is a godless land. Aren't you tired? Don't you want to go home?" Scarves' eyes snapped open, the early morning sun peeking in gently through the curtains. The voice, the dream, whatever it had been, was replaced by the faraway trill of morning birds. It took him a moment to remember where he was, the pieces clicking into place as he recognized the soft snoring that came from beside him. Wachowski was curled up beside him, his expression peaceful.
Oh, right.
He dragged a hand over his face, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. A quick assessment of his body let him know the soreness was still there, but nothing like the stabbing pain of the days before. A subtle movement from the corner of the room startled him, and he tensed before recognizing it as Shadow.
You need a bell.
He scoffed, treated to an annoyed glare from the hedgehog as he shifted, only to find that Wachowski whimpered softly, curling closer. At the sight, Scarves resolved to never move again.
You seem to be in better spirits.
The black hedgehog commented quietly, glancing briefly at Wachowski.
Your energy seems higher today as well.
Scarves only shrugged. The explanation he'd been given the other day on chaos energy had gone in one ear and out the other. He was able to grasp the basics of it, but Buck's shadow having a special insight to his energy was a bit odd.
Just need a good night's sleep, I guess.
Shadow gave him a flat, "Really?" look before rolling his eyes, all too familiar with the casual effect blue hedgehogs adopted when faced with danger.
Well put.
He'd allowed the other to shrug it off for now.
We're heading back to your dimension after midday. Hopefully we'll arrive to some good news.
Scarves beamed, then confident.
No worries, between two me's and Tails, the whole thing will be taken care of easy peasy.
That's impossible.
Knuckles said flatly. He tugged the paper out of Tails' hands, eyeing it once more.
You're telling us Styx was right?
It happens a lot more often than you think.
The Badger said calmly, examining her nails, but anyone could see the excitement rippling beneath her fur eyes darting between Shadow, Buck, and BB.
Okay, let's just think rationally for a moment.
Amy massaged her temples, glaring at the floor.
Buck, BB, does your DNA match back home? Like, do you belong there?
Buck nodded, face scrunching in concentration.
As far as I know, yeah. Up till recently, Tails told me there'd be some changes to it due to the Chaos RNG exposure, but I don't think it was rewritten entirely. Even Shads and I share some similarities since he's part Mobian and all that.
From across the room, Scarf's shadow shot him an odd stare, a faint look of contemplation settling across his features.
Do Shadows and Scarves match? You said he doesn't match ours, but maybe?
They have similarities, yes.
Okay, that's good then. Finally some good news.
Shadow snorted at that.
There's little good about being compared to that buffoon.
Buck only rolled his eyes, a bit exasperated. Every other word from this Shadow's mouth seemed to be buffoon this or fool that. Surely Shads had been a bit more creative than this all those years ago?
Honestly, I'm not sure if that clears up anything, Amy.
Tails sighed as his namesakes flicked tensely behind him.
They still don't match anything, but these results, they're essentially a different race entirely.
It's something, Tails.
What? That Sonic is an alien?
Isn't that what the data so far has been pointing towards?
It's just a theory right now.
Is that the wildest thing to happen here? Because...
Buck jabbed a thumb behind him, gesturing vaguely at where Wachowski had stood only a day prior.
That kid is an alien to his current home, and BB and I have traveled interdimensionally.
Tails, do you not believe in life beyond our planet?
Look, I'm just saying it's unlikely. Look, I'm not sure exactly how Chaos Energy works, or Sonic's body for that matter. His readings have always been all over the place once he finally let me take them.
Tails muttered, spreading out some papers across an already cluttered desk.
But what I did notice that I've missed before was that there was another big change after he visited your dimension.
Buck frowned, looking over the papers. They were close to nonsense to him, honestly, but he implicitly trusted any version of his brother.
It turns out that his consumption of chaos energy jumped exponentially after he visited your dimension. I didn't know what to look for initially, but with your Knuckles' help, I was able to fine-tune some equipment and look.
He pointed to 2 different papers, bringing them together.
He barely used up any prior to going to yours, and when he came back, something caused a spike in consumption, and when he came back, there was no chaos energy for him to take, so he just burned through what he had.
Buck muttered, thinking back on how lively and ecstatic the other hedgehog had seemed.
And when we visited for Murphy Night, he said he was a little sick. He already wasn't looking too great, but around us, he perked up a bit, so much as if he hadn't been sick.
It had been right there, staring at them in the face the entire time. Tails blanched a bit early, realizing it as well.
He was absorbing your residual energy, and when it was gone, he began to starve.
Chaos is something the body becomes accustomed to. Bodies that need more can suffer fatally if it's suddenly cut away.
But he was fine for 15 years.
Tails said his energy consumption spiked exponentially, didn't he? If his body grew up waned off of chaos energy, he would have survived. Being exposed to so much in our worlds kick-started dormant consumption by the looks of it. Hence the speed. And the illness.
Buck asked wearily. He just wanted to know it wasn't his fault that Scarves was like this.
Chaos energy seems to be neutral on his own, and none of you so far had any trouble visiting other worlds, so I highly doubt it.
Is it a hedgehog thing, then?
No, Amy hasn't shown any signs of it, and she's also been exposed to chaos energy.
Shadow?
As Buck asked, everyone's eyes flicked to the dark figure at the edge of the room. Shadow had been strangely silent, offering a glare to anyone who walked too close, but otherwise saying nothing. Tails paused, trailing off into deep thought. Buck had told him that Shadow wasn't at full power, offhandedly mentioning how much easier it was to overpower this version of the brooding hedgehog, as opposed to his own.
Somewhat, the shadow signs aren't as drastic as Sonic's scarves, but according to his energy readings.
The sound of rustling papers filled the air, some of them fluttering from the cramped table and toppling to the floor.
Here, according to these, he is losing energy, but nothing like Scarves is. If they're similar species, it makes sense he's affected less than Scarves.
So we know what's happening? We need to figure out how to stop it.
I can take a look at your Master Emerald.
Knuckles offered and Buck winced, scratching his quills nervously. The proud guardian was not going to take this well.
Yeah, about that.
Knuckles all but wailed into the air, his groaning exasperated by Buck's attempt to calm him down, and BB snickering.
That's impossible. A Knuckles who doesn't know about the Master Emerald is one thing, but no Master Emerald? Ridiculous.
And when Buck leveled an incredulous stare to his friend, however, he got no further clarification. The blue hedgehog shrugged off the doubts. Knuckles had some weird connection with the Master Emerald, understood it on a level no one else was able to match. Buck would take his hope where he could find it.
Hey, Nux.
The taller Knuckles had taken up the spot beside Tails' workbench, sitting cross-legged.
What's that?
Is there an Angel Island here?
The red echidna beamed, hopping lightly to his feet.
Of course.
Buck couldn't help his own grin. Finally, some good news.
Any chance you can take us there?
Sure. I'm not sure I completely remember the way back, but it shouldn't be too hard to find, right?
Buck smiled, a little unsure. His knuckles, on the other hand, bulged a fit, building up inside like a pressure cooker.
What does it mean he doesn't know the way back?
He fumed. That was ridiculous. Angel Island was supposed to be their home, the place they always returned to. BB must have noticed his reaction as he nudged his older self slightly, pointing not so subtly at the shorter echidna who was somehow growing even redder in the face. Buck moved quickly.
Right, now talk, just lie right now. right this moment.
He grabbed the two, gesturing for Tails and Amy to start the plane, pushing both Knuckles towards the hangar. It turned out that this particular Angel Island was not flying hundreds of feet in the air, but located in a rather secluded part of the ocean, like a proper island. Buck, BB, and Knuckles couldn't help but gawk at the sight as Tails' plane approached the landmass, which somehow managed to look awkwardly sitting in the ocean.
You guys act like you haven't seen an island before.
Tails chuckled. That level of shock wasn't one he was used to seeing on his brother, even a different version of him. It reminded him of when they first met. Tails so young and trying hard to just stick with his best chance at survival.
No, it's just, this is a bit different from back home.
Buck murmured faintly. The fox raised a brow at the hero's tone, but didn't push any further, turning his attention instead to the controls. They had to start their descent soon.
So Nux, how come you don't come back here more often? Amy said you stayed in the village full time?
Oh, well, I lived there. Me and Amy had moved there not long after we met Sonic and Tails. Met her on my way to the coast. It was the safest village any of us had been in, so we stayed.
BB shot him a curious look, remembering stories of Scars had told them about the village and the weekly attacks from Dr. Eggman. Even if the doctor was not nearly as murderous as their own, the village wasn't exactly a safe environment by conventional standards.
Eggman's a menace, but the further from a city you are, the more dangerous it is. Bandit groups aren't as big an issue, but people still encounter them. Eggman's just flashy. Those other guys are straight up trouble.
We only meant to help out the first time we got here, so they didn't run us out. Eventually, we all decided to just stay. It's not uncommon for villages to have a small group of fighters. They can't always afford a big skilled police force.
And the village's police force is anything but skilled. When they banished Scars, they had to rely on his stern stairs to keep him from slipping back in.
Knuckles and Buck exchanged a glance as the group of friends laughed at the memory, but that didn't sit well with Buck at all. But he had to remind himself that this wasn't his world, and Scar's friend seemed okay with the situation.
It must be a common arrangement.
He thought, resolving nonetheless to talk to the other hedgehog once all this was settled.
So Scars isn't from the village?
Knuckles asked the others, stealing a glance at the two blue hedgehogs. Buck and BB might be the only two that shared a history due to the odd nature of their meeting and subsequent split, but neither of them talked about it much, choosing to look forward instead of back. Both Amy and the taller Knuckles looked towards Tails, then their own expressions curious as if they were suddenly thinking the same thing. Where had Scars come from? But the fox only shook his head, tapping his bottom lip as he tried to remember.
I met Sonic when I was really young, maybe 4 or 5, so almost 6 years ago.
When did you meet?
Buck asked BB's question, wondering the same thing.
In a forest near another village. I think he was living on his own by then, and he helped me out of a tough situation. After that, I left the orphanage and followed him.
Buck looked away for a moment. It could feel like so long ago, but he remembered thinking of his own tales, back then hardly more than a kid at something who had only slowed him down. It wasn't a truth he enjoyed revisiting now.
So you don't know where he came from?
The resistance leader continued, oblivious to his Buck's discomfort.
Any clues?
Tails only shook his head again, tossing an apologetic look over his shoulder from the pilot's seat.
He said he came from another orphanage like me. I never asked beyond that.
We're here.
The taller Knuckles announced merrily as the plane circled the clearing Tails had chosen to land in. Once closer to the ground, he jumped out of the plane easily. The heavy tension that had blanketed the air swept away as the purpose of their trip presented itself. The jungle, deep and green, swayed quietly in the wind blowing off of the slowing propellers. Something about the place felt solemn, a melancholy that swept in with the breeze. old and unknown. Without a word, they set out the jungle, embracing their forms. Scarves felt a little lighter watching Wachowski burst out into laughter as he ended the story. Even Shadow, perched on top of the couch, huffed in what he suspected was amusement.
You seriously roomed with Eggman?
Maddie gasped, handing him a mug of hot chocolate as they settled onto the floor beside the couch. Scarves had offered to get up many times to give them room, but they'd only ignore him, Wachowski being the only one to join him.
Yeah, and let me tell you, he was a terrible roommate.
I bet.
Maddie giggled, covering her mouth with one hand and reaching out to touch him. The Wachowskis were so casual with their affection. A touch here, a brush here, a smile shared at every opportunity. He'd never seen anything like it.
Do you have any more stories?
Wachowski had his own hot cocoa in hand, but he reached out periodically to press a hand on Scar's arm, the energy pulsing warmly. Before Scarves could answer, however, Tom returned with blankets and pillows for the space he and Maddie had settled into, handing a blanket to a confused Shadow in passing.
Are we gonna watch this movie or not?
He asked good-naturedly, pointing to the dark screen that had gone idle.
One more.
Wachowski insisted, scooching forward, large eyes eager. Before all of this had happened, he had only been able to see the older hedgehogs periodically. Then Scarves had gone through that terrible scare. Seeing him alert, smiling, with some of the brightness returning to his demeanor, was startling, and the boy couldn't help but want to draw it out as long as he could. Chuckling, Scarves nodded, sipping at his drink while he thought about what adventure he should tell about next.
What about a story from your home? Any folk tales?
Maddie suggested. She and Tom knew so little of the planets the other versions of their son came from. The opportunity to learn more, even of a different reality entirely, was too tempting to pass up.
Folktale, huh? That's more up Stick's alley. She's the one who knows all the crazy stories about the pools of chaos, the Pantheon, the nomadic ghost healers.
He rattled these off carefully, not noticing the widening gaze of his audience.
Pools of Chaos? That sounds so cool.
Wachowski wriggled, not complaining when Maddie took his mug from his excited hands with a fond look.
Are they like healing waters or?
Maddie's question trailed off expectantly. Scarves blinked, looking at them for a moment.
The pools of chaos? You know, like the beginning of the universe? I thought everyone knew that story.
Different universe, honey. Are the chaos pools kinda like the Big Bang?
Scarves leaned forward, suddenly eager.
Okay, that sounds way cooler than some lousy pools.
Pools first.
Wachowski nudged him, the prickle of chaos energy rustling his fur slightly.
Alright.
Pausing for a moment, Scarves sipped from his hot chocolate, trying his best to remember the story Styx had told them countless times now. It was such an old tale and known by nearly every person he'd met, even if it was only surface-level knowledge. When he'd first heard it, it had been at an orphanage, before he met Tails. The stories told by the matron, observed by the kind woman, were one of the things he willingly remembered of those days. Scarves did his best to settle into the calm tone she slipped into during story times, fingers settling around the warm base of his mug.
Before the beginning, there was the pools. They were the birthplace of many things, stars, planets, and the unnamed cosmos. But they were also from where chaos emerged.
I thought you didn't know about chaos energy.
Scar's mouth twitched, but he bit back the smile.
Chaos is a who. It had many names and appearances, but in the stories, he is always just chaos. Now, as I was saying, the pools are what everything comes from, and wherever everything will go back into. Light bursts from the pools, but it was also followed by darkness.
He did his best to weave the story of the pools to his audience, faltering only slightly in the beginning under their rampant attention. It became easier soon after that to fall into the little rhyme of the old tale. Once so familiar, it felt imprinted in his mind.
The light and dark shared the pools, which were surrounded in a twilight that allowed them to exist peacefully, in balance. It wasn't until other gods of the pantheon gazed at them with greed, wanting to steal the source of energy of the universe for their own reasons.
He waggled his fingers dramatically, but Wachowski hardly noticed, immersed in the visuals of golden glowing pools and shadowy figures.
Needless to say, Chaos was angry with this. The pools were the birth and resting place of them all. But Chaos had a unique tie to it. They shoved out the gods, exiling them to the furthest reaches of the universe, where Chaos hadn't yet reached. With balance restored, Chaos decided to leave the pools, seeking to protect his birthplace. He sealed it away far from prying eyes, and now he wanders the cosmos, making mortals go mad or blessing them as his whims command him. So behave, or the god of chaos might choose to drag you back into the pools before your time.
He waggled his fingers again, spookily, this time drawing a delight laugh from Wachowski.
That is a pretty cool folk story.
Tom admitted, Maddie nodding sagely beside him. Scarf's only response to the praise was a shrug, but he turned towards the mug of chocolate to better hide the pleased smile that threatened to spread across his face.
Alright, a deal's a deal then. Now, show me this fantastic Earth story Wachowski couldn't stop talking about. That Keanu guy better be pretty amazing.
Tails had chosen a clearing on the outskirts of the landmass, the center covered in a dense jungle before giving way to the shrine that sat at the heart of the island. Knuckles began walking confidently towards where he knew the ruins would be back on his home world. Brushing past the taller Knuckles before stopping short, the dense forest dropped to a steep cliff that presented a clearing view of the terrain surrounding the central shrine. As they joined Knuckles at the edge of the cliff, Buck felt a chill run down his spine.
What happened?
He breathed, eyes widening in horror. The damage on the island was frightening. The city, he couldn't recall the city being so intact back home, held signs of a massive attack. Crumbled buildings, deep gouges in the earth that had long since healed. But Knuckles could recognize the markings of the destructive nature of chaos energy anywhere.
Chaos. Did he attack your tribe for a war as well?
The other Knuckles seemed caught off guard by the question, having fallen into silence at the sight of the ruins.
What? No, he was always with us. I don't remember the stories very well, but we were attacked by the ancients and their weaponry.
His eyes slid out of focus, remembering something old.
Their sentinels were abominations.
Quickly shaking the dark clouds surrounding him, the echidna shrugged and trudged on, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The city, or what was left of it, had once been grand. Towering walls and geometric buildings lined the way to the central shrine. The resistance leader knew was the Master Emerald's resting place back on his world. The jungle hadn't yet claimed the towering structures. They stood defiantly against the onslaught of the greenery. The city encircled by massive pillars that must have held up a wall at some point. Inner sections were dotted with wide open spaces and smaller structures that must have once been homes. The destruction of the grand ruins was jarring. Deep indentations and gouges in the earth from blasts of energy or explosives. The scorch marks in the earth, long since covered, remained etched in stone, jagged edges smoothed by the passage of time. The taller echidna joined them finally, expression unusually solemn, as he took in the destroyed city in the valley. After living in the village for so long, Knuckles hadn't expected to feel anything at the sight of the ruins again. The island had always been a topic he'd shied away from, never truly meaning to hide his true origins, but not eager to recount them either. And standing in front of them after so many years, able to see the details in a newer light, opened something within him.
You asked why I left? There's nothing to live for in a graveyard.
They picked their way through the ruins slowly. The silence hung heavy between them. Buck walked beside his Knuckles, concerned green eyes darting to his friend every now and again. After the statement from the taller Knuckles after they arrived, the resistance leader had stopped any grunts or complaints almost immediately, watching his taller counterpart with a contemplative eye. When they began their approach to what had once been a grand city wall, however, the anticipation had rolled off him in waves. Craning his neck to get a look at every building they walked by, Amy had sometimes gently steered Knuckles out of the way of rubble or foliage, much to Buck and BB's amusement. The resistance leader went so far as to detach himself from the main path to peer into intact buildings. Compared to the rubble and overgrown jungle that inhabited his own Angel Island, with only a single temple left intact, this was the clearest snapshot into his people and culture that he'd ever encountered. Their run-in with the Nocturnus clan not being the best culture immersion of an echidna tribe. They came to what must have been a town square at some point, the wide open space paved with smooth pale yellow bricks that had maintained their form and patterns despite the greenery that attempted to push through the large cracks.
Wow!
Tails breathed, eyes falling on a magnificent basin of water as its center. It was cracked down the middle. The figure adorning the top long since turned to rubble, but the basin itself was massive, lined with pale blue mosaic and dotted with red titles.
I've never seen anything like this before.
Knuckles approached the basin, kneeling in the rubble as he leaned in to examine the designs, his own excitement shining through an ecstatic grin.
I seen something like this. I only saw little pieces in the temple back home, never something so intact.
Around the town square, he could see grooves that must have existed for shops to set up in, the shattered buildings that still held up scorch marks, and the blooming trees that burst through the remains of the buildings, indifferent to the history they buried. And despite the love and honor he held for his people, he couldn't imagine living alone on this island. The past lingered too closely. His counterpart had been right when he'd called it a graveyard. Standing, Knuckles dusted the dirt from his fur, nodding to the others.
Let's keep moving then. We need to reach the top of the shrine.
If we want to reach the top of the shrine, we have to go through the temple.
They all looked up at the towering pyramid, the steps, which hadn't been visible upon entering to the city, had come into view at the end of the street that the square opened to. The destruction around the period was unmatched. Collapsed ceilings and whole chunks missing from the buildings surrounding the central temple. Remnants of machines and armor littered the area, most of it rotten or rusted away by the centuries.
I could fly up there.
Tails offered, eyeing the structure, but BB was the one who shook his head, reaching his hand high above his head.
He's right. It's far too tall and it exhausts you before even getting to the second person.
He turned to the taller Knuckles, who was examining the empty hull of a machine engulfed covered in overgrown plant life.
Lead the way, tallest nuts.
They followed Knuckles, who surprisingly began to lead them away from the central temple.
Knuckles? You're not turned around again, are you?
Amy asked delicately, glancing behind her as if to make sure the temple was in the opposite direction.
Of course not. Team Knuckles never goes astray with me at the helm.
He tossed over his shoulder jovially, his earlier solemn mood nearly melting away. The ruins had always had an odd hold on him, lingering, expectant. It had frightened him as a puggle, but now he felt more curious than anything. Buck turned to Tails incredulously.
Team Knuckles?
Tails snickered and shook his head.
Didn't Scars tell you? He's Knuckles' sidekick.
Nodding his approval, Knuckles didn't bother hiding his smugness. Butt's screech echoed through the street.
What?
Knuckles led them confidently through the streets to a smaller building. The door no longer existed, but the walls were intact considering the surrounding area. The brambles less overgrown in this area. Knuckles paused for a moment, eyeing them curiously before shrugging. Bringing up the rear, the other Knuckles examined the area with a scrutinizing gaze, clearly growing more suspicious the more he saw.
Hail Academy.
Voice low, Knuckles knelt to inspect a group of stones with scorch marks, now sniffling intently. The scent of burnt wood lingered low to the ground.
How many people did you say lived on this island?
Very funny, Knuckles.
No one lives on this island. It's considered cursed by outsiders. My father and I were the last to leave.
Knuckles answered the others, stopping at the entrance to the small building. The resistance leader stood up, violet eyes hard as stone as they examined their surroundings with renewed focus.
Well, we're not alone, it seems.
Surrounded by such magnificence, fallen into decay, the young girl couldn't help but feel her breath catch in her throat as she surveyed the history etched into stone. Her father stood behind her, tense and expectant. He told her stories her entire life, taught her everything he ever learned about her culture in the vain hope of righting the wrongs of hundreds of years ago. But now, in the face of the destruction his people had caused, he couldn't help but feel fear. Would she turn him away? Curse him and the people he once called his own for the destruction they wrought? He couldn't know. Adjusting the brim of his hat, he began to call out to her, stopping as she turned, her eyes bright and cheeks moist.
Tears.
He realized with a thrumming sadness.
Dear girl, I'm so sorry.
While apologies were a little more than droplets of water in the wake of it all, the girl shook her head, looking at her father with conflicting emotions, one shining through nonetheless. Love.
Thank you for bringing me here, Father. I'm glad to be able to see this place with my own eyes.
And truly she should never thank him for anything. But the old turtle couldn't help but return her gesture, offering out one arm to her.
Come then, sweet girl. Let's visit the shrine and offer our prayers. It is our last stop before our trip home.
Nodding excitedly, she quickly brushed off the offering, tears from her own eyes, and took her adopted father's arm, asking all sorts of questions, somber and curious alike, as they picked up their way through the ruins of the Echidna city towards the central shrine. Despite the alarming revelation, they had to press forward. Time was not on their side, today being the final day that Buck and BB can remain in Scar's world without any of the vague repercussions other tales had mentioned. Neither Blue Hedgehog was too keen on going back to their own world when Scar's situation remained so dire. But with the vague cloud of catastrophe hanging over their heads, they knew they couldn't risk it. The sun was at its zenith, beating down relentlessly, the cool valley air doing little to shield the midday glare. The stones were blessed cool. However, the ruins of the city still managed to circulate a breeze through its streets. Tails decided that when given the time, he'd return to examine the fantastic remains of a once powerful tribe. The building was spacious, but not nearly as grand as others closest to the central shrine. Motes of dust rose into the air at the sudden disturbance. Specks of dust were framed in a halo of golden light that trickled throughout the ruined roof, swirling lazily through the air, creating entrancing designs that lasted for fleeting moments. Against the far wall, a door stood, solid and intact. Knuckles seemed withdrawn again, plucking at a bandage on his arm idly. It dawned on the group that returning to his childhood home, the word being used loosely, might be taking a toll on the normally light-hearted Echidna. The door, being of polished stone that gleamed dully even in the dark, gave way easily under Knuckles' hand. He froze for a brief moment before shrugging away whatever doubts he had.
Do those steps lead down?
Amy asked hesitantly. Behind her, Tails was already rummaging through his pack for a light.
Yep, the echidnas are powerful diggers, so a lot of the city was underground.
They followed him in, the narrow beam of light illuminating the wide stairway.
During the war, most of the destruction was above ground. I don't think they realized how much was below. The steps you saw at the foot of the shrine were the public entrance, or so Pop said. The priests and other echidnas went through the temple itself.
He continued, taking a sharp left. They followed him a bit clumsily. Bugs, Knuckles, the only other one who seemed to have a sense of direction and purpose in the dark earth.
This is amazing. I never imagined the underground ruins might extend to the city.
He said, moving to catch up with his counterpart. The thought of a ghost city nestled beneath the ruins was near unbelievable. But the tunnels looked strong, lined by powerful, stout pillars that curved with the walls like a protective ribcage.
But if there was a whole underground city level, how come they were wiped out?
Taller legs slowed to a stop and Knuckles stared at the paved dark blue stone of the floor, eyes far away.
Pop said the battle demolished the city, but our tribe continued to battle. I don't know what the ancients did, but they took something, drove us away, and both groups kept fighting around the world, neither able to forget. Pops was the last of his group. He and my mom came here to hide. It was nice for a while.
When did?
Tails' voice came forward, now reaching out to hold his friend's arm. He never knew. They never asked. No one asked. Ugly things lay in the past. What was the point of dragging them forward? But now, Knuckles was openly telling them. That meant something.
I was 5. It's alright. They taught me well.
He pointed to the end of the hallway where all they could see was darkness.
We're coming up to the temple's library. After that, it's a straight shot up to the shrine.
Library?
Tails blinked, pulling back his hand to glare at his friend accusingly.
You didn't mention a library.
Why would I? It's not like we can read anything on the scrolls.
Knuckles, we can read!
Amy cried out, rubbing her temples. Buck exchanged a glance between his Knuckles and BB, confused.
Wait, Knuckles can't read?
I'm saying it's not common Mombian. It's the Echidna language.
Knuckles, we can translate it. Remember UT? I'll tell Sticks to load him up on an automated carrier to drop him off this way. I can go grab him and meet you in the library.
Nuh-uh, no can do. There's someone else on this island, and I don't think it's a good idea to split up. We'll all go get him.
I can take care of myself just fine. Well, it'll take about an hour for UT to get here anyway. Let's check out the library and shrine. Maybe we'll find the answer to our problems just laid out.
There's no use in going into the library if we can't translate anything. I say we go to the drop site to gather him. It'll take us about 30 minutes to get back there anyway.
Not with yours truly.
Gesturing wildly at himself and BB, Buck fought to keep the offended tone out of his voice.
You just said we shouldn't split up.
Knuckles reminded him dryly, his taller counterpart snickering beside him.
Oh, right.
Let's just head out then. I have some lunch stashed on the plane.
Tails decided, pointing his flashlight back the way they came. BB hopped up excitedly, landing easily on Fox's shoulders.
Ah, Tails, you genius, you.
Buck beamed, clapping his shoulder. Tails laughed aloud at the praise, the happiness soothing the shadows in his eyes and the dark bags beneath them for a brief moment. The group pressed back into the cool darkness. Lodging UT back to the library was going to be a nightmare. The little droid was unable to traverse the ocean on his own and had to be packed aboard a plane programmed to drop him off at the island. Tails spread it over the landing site, hoping his robot wouldn't be too damaged in the landing process. Buck eyed the approaching plane dubiously, the quick explanation of the robot's purpose eluding him still.
So, he's a translator?
He looked towards Tails, who was circling the landing area once more, glancing into the sky every now and again.
He's a universal translator, meaning that he can translate anything to common. Ruins, different languages, thoughts, even lies.
Wait, I'm sorry. Thoughts?
Buck craned to look at Tails, who only seemed slightly peeved at his explanation. Amy coughed behind them, her expression none too happy at the prospect of seeing the droid again.
There's a reason why he was shelved.
She mumbled into her glove. Buck chuckled, glancing at BB, who seemed much more intrigued at the concept than the rest of them.
Well, at least talking to you will be a cinch now, little buddy BB.
Overhead, the plane came over and dropped the robot off. Tails did his best to soften his landing, hands outstretched to meet the droid, the moment it was within reach. Amy stayed back, eyeing the machine, even as Buck, BB, and Knuckles approached it curiously.
You want to see how it works?
Tails asked them brightly, his chest puffing up with something like pride in his invention. Only BB nodded vigorously, but it was all the fox needed to flip a switch from somewhere behind the machine. He joined the three and watching it putter to life. The faint sound of fine machinery whirling, buzzing through the air before its eyes lit up. It turned briefly, seeming almost a bit confused, before settling on BB, who was watching intently.
Finally, science can only get so much across.
Okay, let's just get this thing to the ruins.
Tails said as he disabled UT. Seeing UT disabled, Amy Ten's posture eased almost instantly, joining the group merrily. The taller Knuckles met them at the gates, waving brightly as the group approached. Making their way through the winding streets felt odd the second time around. Buck found himself glancing around more often, the thin quills on the back of his neck prickling with uncertainty the further they made their way through. Nothing could be hiding in the shadows, the daylight shining brightly, leaving little to the imagination. Beside him, BB must have sensed something as his normally easygoing expression had settled into something more alert, dark eyes darting around. Knuckles' earlier assessment of not being alone on the island had not left any of their minds, and the two hedgehogs wondered what exactly they might encounter. But the streets remained blessedly silent, yielding no secrets as the group made their way through the winding streets once more. Within the temple, the library was nothing like they'd expected. Aside from the heavy layers of dust that had coated every surface, it looked like a room trapped in time. With Tails' help, Knuckles uncovered the skylight mechanisms were warped. Glass amplified the sunbeams from above, instantly illuminating the room. And despite the countless years of dust and decay, the room was nothing short of astounding. The main entrance bloomed outwards, two grand staircases leading down onto the center floor. Deep blue marble lined the floors, accenting the pale yellow that seemed to be the common building block of the city. A deeper, more precious stone lined the arches, the semi-transparent nature of the rock giving the ceiling a near ethereal glow. The tapestries that must have hung against one way or another were on the floor, crumpled and rotten. But Tails could make out magnificent colors of blue, a molten yellow and burning red. It must have been a library for scholars, as the central floor was filled with heavy wooden tables, tomes left open, and scrolls unraveled. Untouched for over 2 centuries, huge stacks of scrolls and books lined the central floor, neat signs etched into stone over the arches.
Knuckles, this is...
Amy was in awe, like the rest of them, but had found her tongue first.
I know. It really is something.
As much as some members of the group wanted to stop and examine the library further, Tails and Buck's Knuckles practically vibrating with anticipation. Buck and the taller Knuckles insisted they press on. He seemed uneasy surrounded by so much knowledge that remained firmly out of his reach. Ultimately, Tails decided to stay with Amy and UT to begin scanning some of the scrolls and tapestries, Knuckles reluctantly breaking off to join the 2 blue hedgehogs and his taller counterpart.
You're going to need my help examining the Master Emerald anyway.
If there is one.
Buck didn't voice his doubts out loud, however, but the absence of a Master Emerald would complicate an already difficult situation. The Grand Hall tampered off into a smaller alcove. Twin wooden doors nestled between the shadows of an overhang. Buck pushed the doors open with ease, stopped by a large hand on his shoulder. The hero turned to see the taller echidna's face twisting in thought and concern.
Nux, everything okay?
But a firm squeeze from the echidna, Buck immediately quieted, alert.
I noticed it earlier, but the doors opened with little trouble. But it made sense last time I used them was 10 years ago, but these haven't been opened in over 200 years.
Buck felt a chill run down his spine. Looking past the dark doorway, it seemed they had stumbled upon their company.